do wish that he would just like give us some sense of how he would define that here.
Well, he goes into it a little bit throughout the book, and we texted a little bit about this, where what he calls authority, I think, is he's mistaking for what we refer to a lot of times as confidence or, yeah, drive, all that kind of thing that's slowly built up. Because I mean, how the fuck does one have authority in poetry? Well, you could say they know everything there is to know. If you know all the rules and things, okay, you could be an authority that way, or you could just be in charge. I mean, he's talking about authority over a fucking, creative poem, like something somebody made up. So
Yeah, but
I
I would
think
guess
it's,
that he's.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, so like when we talk about authority in terms of poetry, like I don't think we're really talking about anything, because it's a fucking made up thing. Like, it's, oh, who has authority over this? Well, clearly the poet does. But then you could argue the reader, sure. But I just mean, so then when we're talking about that, we're just talking about interpretation, like calling that authority. We're talking about confidence, willingness to take a risk. We're calling that authority. And I just, one of
Yeah,
the
see,
many
I interpreted
instances.
it as like the authority of like what poems say, right? Like presenting statements with like in a poem as a kind of authority, coming to conclusions about things in a poem in a way that shows authority, right? Like if you talk about like when you think of like poems that make really lofty
But,
statements,
but that's what I mean.
right?
Like, what does he mean about authority in that sense? So if you make something, or what we would call an authoritative statement.
Well, I don't think it's about, I mean, and again, this is just how I sort of was reading it. I think he means like coming to a conclusion
As a
in a
reader,
poem.
writer,
No,
yeah,
as a writer,
as a
like
writer.
about big ideas, especially like coming to a conclusion that is your own, where you're speaking as an authority from your experience. But like, I don't know. Again, like I don't feel like I have enough here to know that with any certainty.
That, and as I hear us talking about it, I'm just always like, yeah, like what is that though? It's like we call it authority, but it's like, oh, like the willingness to come to a conclusion, or to put a conclusion in there
Right. Well,
confidently or
I
something.
think,
So then it's
yeah,
like,
but I think that's what it is, right? Like it's, a
so we're
willingness
talking
to,
about, you
like,
could
do
say
you say this?
agency,
Yeah. I mean, sure.
skill.
I think when it's authority, though, it's like, how do you, at least in terms of the way I'm talking about it, in terms of like in a poem, like, why do we accept a particular poem's authority on any given subject? Like, why would we read Emily Dickinson and say, okay, you have something to say about this, right? It almost feels like when you finish one of her poems, you've learned some kind of little lesson. And I think that, often in poems, poets will make statements and we look for ways to understand them as true. I kind
Yeah,
of think that's what authority is, right?
we'll
To
come.
read something that a poem says and say, yeah, like, okay,
Yeah,
I can accept that as true.
we'll come back to that, because it's going to keep coming up when he mentions authority. He mentions it in almost every essay. Not all of them, but a lot of them that we go through. But before we move on from the case from beauty, this part on page 4.